Today's talk is going to be about psychedelics and psilocybin in particular, and how these can improve mental health and longevity overall. There's been some really interesting research that's come out that we're going to talk about. But why don't I throw it over to you, Neil, to introduce yourself a little bit more? And I know there's some highly topical things that are going on in the regulatory environment that we just talked about this morning that I think might be of interest for the group to hear. But I think we're all looking forward to what you have to share. With all that said, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Nice to meet everyone. My name's Neil Markey. I was at University of Maryland. I'll tell a little bit of my personal story because I think it's relevant for the work that I'm doing. But was at University of Maryland studying math. September 11th happened. Very short. I thought I was doing the right thing. Went in as a lieutenant and went to Iraq as an officer, and then had a chance to try out for a special operations unit called the Ranger Regiment. I went to Afghanistan twice with them. It was wildly adventurous, and now looking back, everybody in that unit had some level of complex PTSD. I got out in 2012 and went to Columbia University for grad school. By some measures, I was doing well professionally, but from a emotional, spiritual perspective, I was in a pretty tough state. I cycled through anti-anxiety medications, SSRIs, sleeping pills, not a whole lot of benefit. The thing that really changed it for me was I got introduced to meditation by a guy that was doing his PhD there and spent quite a few years going quite deep on meditation. Through that same network, I had the chance to have some professionally facilitated psychedelic experiences. There's actually a long history of military veterans getting into Mexico and having these experiences on the underground. You guys are probably seeing a lot of that in the news these days, especially with this administration. It had a tremendous impact on me. It wasn't a one and done, but it was certainly helpful in getting me further down the path to wellness. I was an entrepreneur for a bit and then ended up at McKinsey and Company. I was there for 3 years and then was doing private equity portfolio company restructurings. I always worked really hard and did well, but at the end of that professional corporate experience, I ended up in almost as bad a place as I was coming out of the service after making so much progress. And I was looking around at a lot of my peers, and many of them had impressive educations and came from prominent families. They were taking uppers in the morning and downers in the evening. Their relationships were struggling and they had a lot of resources, but also a lot of strife in their life. 5 years ago, I left and got back to teaching meditation, looking to do something of meaning. And that's when I met this really extraordinary woman by the name of Amanda Fielding and her family. Amanda passed a couple months ago, but she's been called the Queen of Psychedelics by Forbes. She was on Joe Rogan. She's just a really incredible woman who studied psychedelics her entire life. Her family and the philanthropists around her wanted to start building the infrastructure. So they want to, put resources into the locations, the teams, the programs. I was fortunate to co-found Beckley Retreats with her. And we're a US-based public benefit corporation, and we have legal operations in the United States, Jamaica, and the Netherlands. We run what we would call more integrative health programs that use psychedelics as a complement or catalyst. And so we teach a lot of these basic well-being practices: meditation, mindful movement, breath work, gratitude practice. We do that digitally in the prep. And then we bring groups down on site and give them an immersive experience with controlled psychedelic experiences. And then we do a digital follow-up, taking advantage of this window of neuroplasticity and really trying to put in habits, behavior change. In our experience, that's how you can really sustain some of the benefit from these experiences. We are more focused on the betterment of the well end of the spectrum. We actually screen out clinical indications. If someone comes to us with PTSD, we try and get them pointed to more appropriate care. Our guests are generally accomplished white-collar professionals that are looking to become better versions of themselves. They want to work on empathy. They want to work on connectedness. They want to be more present with their families. More and more people are interested in longevity and how living a more connected life can improve and extend their life. And maybe I'll pause there and see if there's any questions, or Anant, if you want to direct me a bit, I'm happy to go wherever.
Thanks so much for the introduction. And by the way, people have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm sure you guys have lots of questions, so please put them in the chat and we'll start to go through those. Just to start with something that we were talking about this morning, which was the regulatory environment. A lot of us are here in the United States. I know we have an international group as well, but the United States often sets the tone for what happens How is this new administration thinking about psychedelics, and what can we expect in terms of availability as practitioners with our ability to engage with these for our patients?
Ketamine has been available for quite some time, and doctors can write that off label and do it through IV or intramuscular. And then there's also FDA approved versions that are nasal sprays, like Spravato. And so it's kind of a non-classic psychedelic, but that's one that exists. And I think if you look at the data's pretty good. I have concerns around the ketamine kind of gold rush right now because I don't think that every organization is doing it at a high level of professionalism and really focused on the behavioral health around the experience. Maybe we can put that to the side for now. On the other bucket of psychedelics, MDMA was getting taken through clinical trials, and I think many of us thought that was going to pass last summer. It was being driven by the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies and their spin out for-profit company called Lycos, but that got denied. There was some sloppiness on MAP's side, but also we were running up against the establishment. The FDA doesn't approve the therapy component. They just look at the compound. Lycos was right in saying they need to be done together, but I think it created some friction in that archaic structure. Now, there's other organizations that are, pretty far down the road with many different clinical trials. There's another Beckley entity called Beckley SciTech that just merged with Atai Life Sciences. They just had very positive phase 2 results. So there's lots of kind of momentum, and I think MDMA, psilocybin will, in the next couple years, be FDA approved and be able to be used by doctors. RFK has publicly said he wants federal level change for psychedelics in the next year. If you look at the people around him, he just hired a lawyer by the name of Matt Zorn, who was a career attorney who was suing the federal government for marijuana reform. So this is the type of guy that wants to see some change. I think we could see federal rescheduling of some of these compounds in the next 12 to 18 months, but it's a little hard to tell. We operate in Jamaica and the Netherlands, and we can operate there legally so long as we aren't making medical claims. As long as we're clear with our guests that, we're allowing for personal, professional, spiritual development, we're within those legal frameworks. And then if you look broadly in the rest of the world, the Czech Republic just passed legislation, Australia just passed legislation last year, the Middle East is planning to pass legislation. So I think it's unprecedented times for the awareness and acceptance of these compounds. It's pretty exciting, but we also need to do it thoughtfully. I think there's a risk of some backlash in the next few years from the lack of regulation and, low professionalism, new entrants.
Well, that's super exciting, and thank you for sharing that insight. I think that kind of begs the next question, which is, as practitioners, as longevity physicians, as functional medicine practitioners, how should we think about engaging with this? Is this something where it's something that we should do ourselves? Is it something where we're better off partnering with groups like you? What's the best way to get educated on this? Maybe you can just give us a simple framework on how we should think about these compounds for our patients, especially because I think your patient population is highly relevant to most of our patient populations, where we are working with people who are kind of well, so to speak, but are looking to improve their longevity, improve their performance. So yeah, just I guess the two asks would be, how should we engage with this, and what's a framework that we should use to think about the different options we have for people?
Yeah. Well, we're having more and more concierge doctors come down on programs to get a feel for it. I would really encourage people to try and have their own personal experience. These are different than giving a medication without any need for conscious buy-in from the recipient. There's intentionality to it. And there's a saying, psychedelics aren't for anybody that don't want to use them. And I think that's for definitely the case. But I think what we're seeing is they can be quite a complement to other integrative health practices and behavioral health interventions. They create this openness and you get people's attention in a way that is quite unique. Around that, you can even get better compliance on other interventions, whether it's diet or supplementation. A lot of it is getting people to actually do it I think these experiences can be a complement to people that want to improve their life, want to be more present, increase empathy, finally make change. We hear that a lot. People come in and they'll say, I've wanted to adopt new habits. I've wanted to make change in my life. I just haven't been able to. And then they have these experiences that open something up in them that allows them to finally take steps towards a new goal. And Nantan, we were talking about it briefly earlier, the research around what these substances do to the brain and central nervous system and the potential impacts on longevity, it's still emerging, but there's some really good signals that just from like a general wellness, psilocybin, for example, looks like it has some real health benefits. It's quite exciting.
Yeah, I just pulled up for the group that paper you were alluding to. This came out just earlier this month. It's a mouse preclinical study, but it showed that psilocybin can extend cellular lifespan and improve survival of aged mice, which was a very interesting finding. I mean, this was certainly not one of the compounds that people had on their minds as being an anti-aging compound, but we have these findings. Do you have any theories on why this might be the case?
In terms of mechanism of action, psilocybin has been used for thousands of years in many different communities all over the world to help people connect more with each other, connect more with nature. And yeah, we're still very much, you know, trying to understand these consciousness experiences that are different than just normal, you know, pharmacological interventions. But it's quite interesting. This idea of resonance in the body and homeostasis. I think that these experiences, alongside with meditation and awareness practices and nature connectedness, are doing something at a quite deep level that's allowing the body to be back more in its more normal, non-stressed state.
I think that those are all good insights. Personally, I think that we are just starting to scratch the surface of the role of the brain in driving health throughout the body. Increasingly, I think we're going to discover that if we do things to put the brain into a better state, the body will follow. GLP-1s to me are another example where newer research is showing that a lot of the real effects of GLP-1s happen not in the intestine or the pancreas, but by their activity in the brain. And then the downstream effects that has from the brain on down. I am curious. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, if you look at a brain on an fMRI during a high dose psilocybin session, it's pretty fascinating. It's allowing parts of the brain that haven't connected before to connect, or maybe they've lost connection. The brain is lighting up in different patterns, and we can see that at the brain scan level, but I don't think it's a huge leap to think that, maybe that connectivity is happening in the gut and the central nervous system too. And so obviously that has a huge impact if we're getting parts of the body to awaken again and communicate better, then there could be some impacts to health, wellness, and longevity too.
My question was in the course of doing your retreats, have you guys ever measured any biomarkers, even things like HRV or sleep data or glucose like CGM data or any kind of blood work? Have you
We're
guys,
just we're
yeah.
just starting, and we've had people anecdotally tell us that their sleep has improved and they've seen it on their Whoop. We don't have a good body of data for that, but we're starting to do that, and we're putting about 600 people through a program a year. So we'll get pretty good end values pretty quick, and are, yeah, excited to look at that because I think there's definitely some impacts on sleep. And then, man, there's so much stuff that's downstream from sleep. So
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Let me turn to some of the questions from the group. First one is any liability for providers recommending retreats? Does Beckley offer private retreats if we have enough patients, and can the doctor come for free?
liability, in our interpretation, there's some things you need to be clear on. You can't be recommending this as a medical treatment, but as long as you're using the right language, that's okay. We also can't pay financial benefit to medical professionals like an affiliate fee. As long as we're using the right language and it's communicated clear, I can share more information on this. There's nothing that prevents anyone from suing anyone. So there's always this unknown civil risk, but you're not breaking any laws, as far as our interpretation. You should definitely check with your own attorneys on that. We would love more, concierge doc partners. We've been bringing more people down where we sponsor it if we feel there's a potential partnership and some resonance. I'd love to follow up with whomever's interested in something like that.
Awesome. Yeah, if you don't mind putting in the chat, Neil, if you don't mind actually can I share your email with people who are interested?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Awesome. Next question. There's a gentleman operating in the UAE. Should he follow up with you by email? He's interested in knowing about the state of this in the Middle East.
Yeah, that'd be fine. It is a bit of a black box, but I can share the little I know. Some of the royal family have had their own personal experiences and are quite adamant about making this available to people in that region in a safe way. They want to get it right. And there's been some pieces written by some senior religious leaders that have said, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, psychedelics, if used in the proper way, are consciousness expanding as opposed to alcohol, which is consciousness limiting. And so, in their judgment, it is in alignment with Muslim law, which is extraordinary and historic. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out over the next few years.
Very interesting. I want to turn to more of a clinical question here. So, what kind of doses of psilocybin do you use? What kind of dose of psilocybin do you use? Or is it dry mushroom weights? How do you think
So
about?
we make a mushroom tea, but we measure it and test the mushrooms so we know the active amount of psilocybin in each batch. It moves around a little bit, but we can control for that. The amount is a discussion between the individual and the senior facilitators within a predefined range. And that range is generally around 1 to 5 grams of dried mushrooms, which is around the active psilocybin you would see in clinical trials at Johns Hopkins. We are supportive of the synthesized psilocybin, but there's also been some interesting research that maybe the natural compounds are better because you get these entourage effects. I think our programs are also trying to thoughtfully blend some of these more traditions, things that we've learned from some of the wisdom keepers that have advised us on the program, and allow for some of the tradition to come through, robust safety standards and good professionalism and checks and balances. Our experiences would be a little bit different than someone going to have this experience in a doctor's office. And so, again, not for everyone and not for everything, but for people that are generally well and looking for more self-actualization, I think getting people in groups in nature is significant and quite different than doing this work in a doctor's office with a headset on. Not right or wrong, just different.
Got it. And then related question is, are there any kind of medications that you recommend people not be on? I mean, one that's highlighted here is MAOIs. Are there any other medications that you generally think of as being incompatible with this type of therapy?
Yeah, the kind of highest risk factors from a psychiatric perspective is, well, none medications, but clinical indications, bipolar, schizophrenia, multi-personality disorder. That's a pretty clear no for us. Now, there are researchers saying these compounds could potentially help those indications, but that needs to be done in a much more controlled setting with a lot more thought into the prep and follow on. There's a lot more consideration with someone that has those indications. From a medication perspective, there is potentially a bit of heart risk with psilocybin, although it looks very small. But if someone was on heart meds, we would definitely, look at that and go into more detail, and more likely than not, politely decline someone that had a lot of heart conditions. And then SSRIs and anti-anxiety medications. Generally, for us, that's a no, not because there's a contraindication, because that is a signal of some underlying mental health conditions that are being managed. For us, it's just we're managing for a group dynamic that we want healthy and well, and it's good to have everybody on the same playing field. Although we do make some exceptions if it's low dose and everything else on their profile looks really good, but those are the exceptions. I'm happy to share our medication risk matrix. That's all public. We spent a good amount of time getting consultation on that.
That would be great. Are you okay continuing from this point, Neil?
Yeah, I've got another 5 minutes if that's okay.
Okay, awesome. Good question from Paul here. What's the vetting process for the clinics and retreats aside from word of mouth? Are there any certifications that we should be aware of?
No. So this is a challenge and opportunity for the industry right now. There's no central governing body. And honestly, yoga has a more structured, formal certification process than psychedelic retreat centers do right now. Definitely buyer beware. There's lots of good people and programs out there. There's a lot of fly by night. I would just ask a lot of questions to understand the level of professionalism and the capability of the facilitators is really key too. And this is a skill that takes quite a while to learn to do it really well. You want facilitators that have that depth of experience.
That's a great point. My impression is that this type of therapy can be tremendously transformational, but it has to be done in the right setting and with the right type of support and expertise. For most of us, we will better serve our patients by sending them to experts like you, where you can provide a really immersive, high quality setting. Most of us can't do this right now because legally there isn't the framework. But even once there is, my impression is that this works better when it's done in this kind of integrated, multidisciplinary setting. Is that kind of how you're thinking about the future of how this therapy gets out there?
Yeah, I think there's definite benefit to people getting out of their normal environment, going away, digital detox, connect with nature. I think there's something very significant there, and we're big proponents of that. That's not the most accessible option for some people, and so we're super supportive of clinics that want to add this capability. I think it's a really good tool to have in the toolkit. We're honored to have more medical professionals in our network that we can work with. It's good for us to have connections back in people's geographies and they come with us, one time a year. Well, they're going to need some support in between. They can't come back once a year. Maybe it's every other year. We would love to have those types of relationships where we can continue to support people ourselves or through partnerships because the journey continues.
Awesome. I know we're coming up on time here, but do you have any training resources for physicians or clinicians to get smarter about psychedelics? Obviously, it was impossible to cover everything that one would need to know, even if we're not providing the therapy ourselves. Is there any training resources that you either provide or recommend for us if we want to dive in deeper?
Yeah, and if we can follow up, I can put some thoughts on paper and I'd be happy to do that. There's a Beckley Academy organization that does training for clinicians who want to do psychedelic experiences. And so that would be quite relevant, but they're also working on a course that is just more one level up, which is kind of more, these are psychedelics. This is the kind of pros, cons. This is the industry. This is how they fit into the models. And so I think they'll have that done by the end of the year and would love to share that with you guys too.
Got it. Awesome. And Kasim just put one called drugscience.org. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
And MAPS is a quite a good research resource, multidisciplinary association for psychedelic studies. It's a nonprofit that's been around for quite some time and is a great resource for learning more about these experiences.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I know you've got to go now, but this was super insightful, interesting. I wish we had more time. And if you're open to it, I'd love to have you back.
Let's do it again. I could bring someone from my team, like maybe Dr. Dingle or one of our lead facilitators, one of our researchers or something, and they'll be able to get into a level of detail on some things better than me. So yeah, I would be honored to speak with this group again.
Awesome. That would be great. I think this group would really appreciate it. If you don't mind, I'll share your email address with the group so that folks who want to make referrals or make connections can do so. Otherwise, I appreciate you spending some time with us this morning. For those of us from the group who joined, thank you. And I know many of you will be listening in later to the recording. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a great day.
Take care. Nice to meet everyone.
All right, take care, guys.
Appreciate it.
Bye.